Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are talking about getting more out of life. And I'm excited about this conversation because as we head into the fall season, things start to speed up a little bit. Many of you are already in school. My kiddos have just begun school because we're here on the West Coast and we get a late running start at it. And it is I guess I want us to be intentional as we talk about how do we use tech well? How do we live out the gospel, the good news that God saves sinners? And as sinners saved by grace, what does that look like with our tech, with our children, with our time? Getting more out of life, what I really want to talk about today is 3 things we can stop doing. I'm going to give 3 challenges that I have been practicing that I found so challenging. I thought, hey, why not pass it on to others? And then 3 things that we might be able to continue doing or even adding to our lives, not as an additional act of trying to impress people or something to make us busier, but in addition to help us get more out of life. When I use that phrase, I do not mean more money in your checkbook. While the Lord may choose to grant you money in this life, you ain't taking it with you. That's not how riches are measured. And as my sons and I were reading the other night, there is actually a point where you get treasure and go, what should I do with it? I should build more silos. And the Lord goes, you know what? It was my treasure anyway, and your life is forfeit. I get it, but we're going to make sure you understand who's actually in charge. So the goal is not get more money. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying get more vacation time out of life. Please take a vacation. It's lovely, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying more efficiency, more effectiveness, or even anything truly measurable. What I mean is really 2 focus verses for us today. John 10:10, when Jesus says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. When we talk about having more of life, then we mean having more of Jesus. And I don't mean that, that phrase is almost like co-opted by t-shirts from the 90s. I want more of Jesus. And generally we have an image of maybe a worship service or maybe a bunch of Bible verses around our house. But how do we have more of Jesus? Well, we have to pour ourselves out and be filled by him. And this is the picture that we see in Acts 2. When Pentecost happens, we're literally filled. This is what Jesus promised in John 14 through 16. This is what's promised all the way back in Isaiah and through all the prophets that Jesus is going to come. Yes, that's great. And you're going to be saved. Yeah, that's cool. But Hebrews tells us he's been doing that forever. What's happening now? What's the new thing he's doing? Well, he did it to destroy sin, Satan, and death, as we learn in 1 John. Jesus came and died and rose again, not just so we could be saved, but no less than that, but so that God's kingdom can come and his will can be done on earth as it is in heaven, that God will indwell us and actually work through us. We are told in 2 Corinthians 4, I love this line from Paul, this treasure, the treasure of God's own presence in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. This is the getting more out of life. How do we make sure our jar of clay, my goal for you is not in any of these conversations or any of these resources I make to make you look shiny. That is not my goal. I don't want to gild you in gold and go, look at this pretty gold-covered jar of clay. I don't want anyone to look at you and go, wow, that's a really cool jar. They must really have it together. That's not the goal. The goal is to say, I'm a jar of clay. You should see what's inside. And when you bump into stuff in life and break and stuff spills out of you, it should look like Jesus. And when it doesn't, here's the good news for believers. When it doesn't look like Jesus, there's actually a belief step there. We repent. We say, Lord, that was terrible. I know for a fact that didn't line up with who you're calling me to be because it didn't look like Jesus. It didn't look like Galatians 5:22. It wasn't love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. Instead, it was anger and it was rage and it was jealousy and it was envy and it was contempt and it was dissension and it was lust and it was these bad things, bad fruit that came from me that you died for and paid for. So I'm not going to just gild my jar of clay and make me look better so people are impressed. I'm not just going to hide the bad fruit and try to I love the image. The first time I heard it was pastor from my church, Rob, talked about tying good fruit onto the tree. I don't know where the image comes from, but I love that idea of like, I'm going to take kindness and like tie it onto my tree so people are impressed. Like, well, if it's not alive, it will rot. I'm not asking you to do anything today about getting more out of life than trusting Jesus that he has saved you. And if you don't trust him yet, to recognize that that's where your value comes from, because you are a child of God, as we learn in Romans. Then the promises apply to you that mean you're a new creation and that you are living in his kingdom as it comes, before it comes, that you are actively living in the process of God indwelling people and then working in this real world for good works, Ephesians 2:10 tells us. So let's keep that in mind. Jesus says we're going to have life abundantly, John 10:10, and 2 Corinthians 4 reminds us that we hold that abundance in jars of clay, that our abundance isn't so that we can be amazing. Our abundance is so that God can be shown as amazing, so that that everyone will know the power belongs to God, not to us. So with that in mind, 3 things I've been challenged to do. The first is quit checking my news every day. Now you're like, how does that affect you, Nathan? Well, some of you, if you're longtime listeners, you know this, but I am a history poli-sci double major in college, got into law school and that was going to be my jam and went a different route. Another story for another day. What I do though is like under the guise of being informed, being a good American citizen, being an educated historian and political science nerd, really, I will read the news and then panic. I will say I want to know how to pray, but I generally don't pray unless, dear God, come soon, right? Like that is my prayer, which is a fine prayer. And yet, what I will do is I will check it in line. I will check it when standing in a hallway. I will check it while a child brushes his or her teeth. I will use it as a little mental escape in any moment I have available to me, because it makes me anxious to not know. And then once I know, it makes me anxious, which makes me more likely to check. I love just the gossipy nature of most modern news sources. The way it's really not enough information to be informed, but it's enough information to be mad or really happy. And that I have found pivoted my heart away from Jesus. It disallowed my ability to be present and abundant. And I need to be present in this moment, the moment that God has called me into. So I have found that if you read your news every 2 weeks, I'm telling you, 2 weeks, turn off the stream of news that you've got going on your TV. Turn off the stream of news you're listening every morning, first thing when you get in your car, sometimes before you had breakfast or Jesus. I mean, we're talking turn off the constant drip, unfollow or silence that Twitter feed. Don't look at whatever the political or social pieces you might be following on Instagram and social media, TikTok, Facebook. Give yourself space. And then when you want to be informed, every literally 10 to 14 days, go check it out. Go ahead. And what you will find is all the stuff that mattered 2 weeks ago is still there. It's still happening. You can still pray for it and you won't feel lost. Like it doesn't move that fast. You're like, what? Like they totally solved the war in Ukraine? They didn't. They fixed Israeli-Palestinian relationships? They did not. It turns out that's been going on for longer than the last 2 years. So you will, in the next 2 weeks, still be informed. You'll still be able to pray. You'll still see God work and you'll see the trajectory. You'll know the candidates for presidency. You'll have a general grasp of their policies. They're not changing that rapidly. Your ability to be informed is still present. Your ability to be discerning is still there. And if you really want to study, you're welcome to dive into like not newspaper articles, but like if you want to go look at the Supreme Court briefing or something, like that's okay. Like if you want to really dig into the nuts and the bolts and like chew on information and ingest it and apply it, awesome. But if you do what I did, which is just use it as a distraction, I would strongly encourage you to put it in a box and set that box in a shelf and say, I'm going to come check you when I get around to it, right? Set yourself a time limit. And if it sounds completely nuts to leave it 2 weeks, try it 2 days. If you're checking compulsively like I was, the point is give yourself the breathing room and I promise you will love it. You'll hate it because you were using it like me, like a chocolate chip cookie for your eyes to just feel good in that moment. But the anxiety that you are exposing yourself to, that I was exposing myself to, the amount of vitriol that's in those day-to-day conversations that isn't there in the 2-week look back piece. That's the other cool piece. You're getting the hot take right now on the ongoing news, which is really just whatever side's gossip stream stream of consciousness, just bashing of whatever is happening or whoever did it. 2 weeks later, there's a much more condensed, concise, informed, and just human tone to it all. So I would strongly encourage you, in light of living life abundantly and making room for Christ in our hearts and our brains, take a step back from that news. Whatever your news source is, be it a newspaper, a news app, a news feed, a news show, news radio, take 2 weeks. Give yourself something else to listen to. Some awesome options would be the Bible, would be an edifying biblical teacher. If your church does the sermons, you can re-listen to that week's sermon so you could talk about it with your peers and your family and your community. But find yourself, there's great audiobooks. I won't even dive into too many of them, but there are great audiobooks of people who love Jesus and who are passionate about helping us. Donald Whitney's Family Worship. Check it out. It's short. It's a great short listen. Incredible, and it's encouraging. And you can use that time to put new information into your heart and into your mind that would help you focus your eyes on Jesus. So that's our first thing. The second thing that I've been doing is getting my phone out of my room. And this has been good, but it's been an ongoing practice because there's always the challenge of like, oh, but I probably should have it in my room tonight because of, and sometimes that's true. And it's one night off that I need my phone near me because of something happening in life, but to keep moving it out, to make a phone bedtime. I got an awesome note from a wife, a woman who is a wife, who said, without telling her spouse, I started doing this. And she's like, it didn't take a week for my spouse to not mention it to me, but to mention it to someone else in conversation. Be like, yeah, it's crazy. She hasn't been having her phone in the room at night. Like, she's going right to bed. And like, she overheard this in another room. And like, that was a week of just not doing anything. I'm not preaching to my spouse. I'm not telling. She actually chose to put it in a bathroom. So that it wasn't something she walked past. It was like in one of the bathrooms and a part of the house that she doesn't go to. I just leave mine downstairs. I actually leave it connected to my, to my work laptop. And that seems to work well enough for me. But get your phone out of the room. People always go, what do you use? I use the Lexon Flip alarm. I think it's $40 now. Thanks inflation, but it's either 30 or 40. And I use the little travel one. So I use the smaller of the two options if you are looking at them. And I take it when I travel. You can lock it so it doesn't, change the time on you. And then you flip it over to turn on the alarm, tap it to hit the snooze, flip it over to turn off the alarm. Like, it's very simple. It works great. Anna has one. I have one. And it's awesome. It's a great solution when you don't need $1,000 alarm clock. The point being that it shouldn't be the first thing we look at in the morning. It shouldn't be the last thing we look at night. It being your smartphone and the manifold distractions it holds. You don't need social media as the last thing. You don't need that thing from work, that email, that text. If you're like, hey, I read my Bible on it, super cool. Please get a physical Bible or find another solution. Print out the pages you're going to read today, whatever it might be. Find yourself a way to stay away from a screen right before bed, both for the science side on like what blue light does to you or what the idea of your phone does to you, the number of things it attaches to are not things that are going to help you rest, and making room for that quiet space for the Lord, making room for the fact that there are people in your home that you can now be present with because you're not getting that last hit in before you go to sleep. Third and finally, making dinner conversation real again. This has been something that slipped over the summer. Anna and I realized about 2 nights ago, and we're like, you know what? We eat together, but we don't talk. Our kids like run in from the yard because we just moved. And so there's always like boxes and things going on, and they'll just like blow through, grab food and be gone. And they're 10, 8, and 5, but it's getting that spot like, oh, you know what? We should probably reestablish this practice of actually talking to one another. Now, sometimes it works just to say, what's the best part of your day? What was the hardest part of your day? And that's great. You can try out Hadley's favorite prompt of what animal would you be if you could be any animal? We could ask that question on loop. We give the kids chocolate chips. If they ask, so if you ask a question, you get 2. If you answer a question, you get 1. And that's just a way. I want to say one of my sisters actually gave me that idea of just, I think Nicole, I'm giving you a shout out. Sorry if it was you, Kelsey. But that idea of like, how do I put some put some oomph behind this. I want to motivate you to communicate. I want to motivate you to practice the skill of interpersonal communication. It's not easy. It's not always natural. So how do we do it? You can, if you need, something like the Hygge cards. It looks like Hygge, Hygge. You can use those. Are conversation starters, and they're appropriate. Some of them are just like a little dense, but you can, and by dense, I mean there's a lot to it, like, what's your greatest fear? Like, sometimes that's not great for dinner with a 6-year-old, but certainly there are ways to be conversational and intentional and asking questions that might get you unexpected answers. That's really the point, is just let's talk, let's update, let's hear from one another, and let's let it be more than just get the right answer out because it's a checkbox. And instead hearing, like, my kids might say, oh, we really liked X activity. And the follow-up naturally would be, well, what did you like about that activity? Or why did you enjoy that? Or did anyone enjoy that with you? Like, just trying to get more to it. So those are the 3 we've been working on. I guess I said they were removings, but they were really just changes. Then there's the additions. These are things that I'm adding to my personal life and that have been really positive over the last couple of weeks. I want to share them with you as we talk about getting more out of life and living life to the fullest, meaning everything we do to bring glory to God and to see God working in us and through us. So the first thing I've had to add is a priority list. This is literally a list of the things that are most important. I've been using a prayer journal, and the prayer journal just has like a space at the top that says, what it's actually from King's Forge, kingsforge.com. I think he only bulk sells them. So don't go like expecting to get one little prayer journal, but no, sorry, not King's Forge, kingsiron.com. Sorry about that, Ray. But I've been using it and it's been great. It's a 40-day missional journal. And I don't know about you, but like growing up in the 90s, I grew up with lots of journals and lots of how to get in touch with God and 10-minute quiet times. And like, this is the way you got to do it. And if you miss a day, you better make it up. And like, it was very stressful. I don't know if it was the adults or just like the way my brain worked, but I was really stressed out by a lot of that. And I got really well into adulthood. We're talking up until the last 5 years. I kept a lot of that, like, if I start my day with Jesus, then my day is good. If I didn't start it, then I'm basically driving a car with no gas in it. And while there is absolutely truth to that, I want to come into the presence of the Lord because I love the Lord, not because I'm feeling guilt about not doing my checklist. So the checklist can be motivating, but it can have a downside. What I'm talking about in terms of priorities is making sure the first things comes first. This prayer journal helps me write down what my focus is for today. What's my objective today? So love Anna and pray and lead my children, right? Like that's top of my list. Serving and loving the Lord. And okay, how am I doing that? Like having to write those down for an objective takes it from a good idea in theory to like, okay, but I also know what I have to get done today. So like, how do I do that? How can I be prayerful? Priority means sometimes first in an order. That's great. So, all right, well, I need to pray first. I need to read scripture first. I need to make sure my heart's in the right spot. Sometimes priority means, no, the thread throughout all of this is preeminent over the task itself. So if I can't do this while looking at Jesus, then I need to find another way to do it. I need to ask somebody else to do it. Like I don't have the bandwidth to do it right, then I shouldn't be the one doing it, or it shouldn't happen right now, even if it is really important to get done. That's what I'm talking about, priorities. A friend helped me. He's a Scrum Master. He is a Agile coach. I want to say he's a Six Sigma black belt, but I don't remember if he actually finished that course, so I don't want to brag too hard on him. But the point is, the dude's organized. And he's like, you need to break down your day into 30-minute increments. And I was like, what? And he's like, it's not that hard. Just set a timer every hour and write down what you did in 2 chunks. And it's not like folded socks for 3 minutes. It's like, oh, did laundry, 30 minutes. Boom. And if it was 27 minutes and 3 minutes of something else, fine. The bulk of that half hour, though, was doing laundry. And then what else? And then what else? So recording a podcast might take 3 or 4 of those to prep, and then 2 of those to record. And right, like the work of posting it and doing all that is another one. And so I go, oh, you know what? This day, primarily, if there was 6 or 7 of those that were podcasting, like that was a good chunk of my workday was podcast prep and execution, right? That helps me see, was that a priority? Right? Like, is that doing it? Not doing it. Is that doing what the Lord has asked me to do, both missionally, familially, with my time that I have and the priorities that I've got? Lets me see that. It also lets me see when I look back the last hour and go, ooh, I was supposed to be doing email, but I got stuck on YouTube. It's real, and write it down. It's not shame based. It's not a grade. You don't have to show this to anyone, and Jesus already knows. This is just so that you're aware of how your priorities are going, and that priority list helped me realize, you know what? I say these things are important, but I'm actually doing my actions in a way that prioritizes these projects or these opportunities, and I need to shift some things around. Some of that was exercise got downgraded for me. There are going to be days where when I get to a certain point of the day, if I haven't exercised yet, it means the day is too busy. The next 3 hours are just getting work done and getting prepped for fam. That's really hard for me, right? I really like working out. It's positive for my mental ability. I work out of my home so I don't get a commute, and it's important. But I realized in writing down my priorities that it wasn't as important as I thought it was. That's what we're looking for. Yes, you're going to find some things where you're like, whoa, that's a waste of my time and energy, and I need to give that to the Lord. I need to stop watching that, stop listening to that, stop going there, stop using that. Cool. Please do that, and let that be a part of your repentant, deliberate discipleship process as you walk with Jesus. And yet, you might also find that there's a lot of good things and maybe a few too many. And a couple you have to set aside and say, you know what, Lord, you're good enough. I trust you to use even my not being involved in A, B, or C. So priorities list is first. The second is real world experiences. In this, I'm going to use the Jonathan Haidt definition of real world experiences. So they're embodied, meaning it's person to person. They're synchronous. They're happening at the real time. They are one-to-one or one-to-several. So it's not you broadcasting like this right now. This is not a real world experience because I'm not with you. It's not happening at the same time. I'm not speaking live. It's recorded. And I'm talking to a lot of people. This isn't 1-to-1 or 1-to-5. There's no way for you to give me real-time feedback. So while this is good, this doesn't count as a real-world experience. This is a way to set your mind on the Lord and to improve your practice of both parenting and living in a tech world. Cool. Please do that. And find the opportunity for real-world experiences. This can look like family dinner, which I mentioned already. That's a great way to fit a real-world experience. Or family breakfast, or family lunch. It doesn't have, dinner's not magical. It just tends to be the one where everyone's home. But if family breakfast is the way you do it, I know some families where they go, you know what, our big meal together is breakfast. And we talk about our day or talk about the previous day if we didn't see one another, and we handle our conversations and our communication deliberately that way. Super cool. Car rides are another great way. Anna, in her book, The Graceful Disconnect, talks about this, about how we can redeem some car rides. Sure, listen to music, enjoy podcasts together, but don't let that be every ride. Take a week. Take this next week and just have that be the conversation time. Cards can help with that, or just telling stories and sharing with one another. Family walk is one that we've done here in the new neighborhood. We live in an area now where we can walk, which is great. I say now. Both areas have been able to walk, but we still live in an area where we can walk, which is wonderful. So we take little itty bitty walks. We go around a block. It takes us 8 minutes, but it's 8 minutes, and that's intentional and great. So feel free to take or leave the resources that help you or hinder you, but may they be real world experiences. And then finally, the third thing I'm working on adding to my life, and I encourage you in talking about building the character of our lives, the way we react to things when we don't think about it. How do we do that? Well, it's practice. And how do we get into a form that we want to see? Well, it's discipline, not tying fruit to trees discipline, but discipline of, no, I want to look like Jesus. How do I do that? I need to be around him. I need to read scripture. I need to worship. I need to pray. I need to make time for that. So I can't look like Jesus by pure effort, but I can do it over time by spending time with him. That's why Moses' face glowed. It's because he spent time with Jesus. It's why when Peter is preaching in the temple, they made note that this fisherman has been with Jesus. He looks like Jesus because he was around him. That is what we're talking about, is making space, disciplines, the choice to do with little decisions what you can't do by will alone. That's the Dallas Willard quote that I love for what discipline is and why it's absolutely practical, and it's not simply behavior modification to earn your own righteousness, gild your jar of clay. Instead, it's to look like Jesus because that is right and good. And the only way to do that is by saying no to other things because they're not high enough priority. So doing hard stuff is my third one. And by hard stuff, I don't just mean, okay, sometimes that phrase is used like somehow if you do something hard, then it built character. And as long as it was difficult, then it was good. I don't mean that. I mean type 2 fun, the kind of fun that takes work. So for me, this is riding a bike. I love riding a bike, and it takes work, but it's still good. It's a good kind of work, and it takes prep. It's not the most efficient process for exercise. Running, super efficient. You put on some shoes, you're gone for however long, and you come right back. Mine, like, there's maintenance, and there's parts that break, and there's things to replace, and there's tires to pump and to worry about. And there are rabbit trails. You don't know, a golfer or a cyclist. Those are two areas where rabbit trails will get you, where like you can just study, rims for hours. Just rims, nothing else. And you may never buy one because you can't afford them, but you could study them and probably covet a little bit. Doing hard things, though, isn't about just doing the hard thing. It's about giving yourself an opportunity to be uncomfortable, to experience some of real life, and to recognize your own mortality and recognize some of the passion God's given you. I never would have tagged myself as an endurance athlete, and yet, turns out I love it. My children have really enjoyed fishing. I'm not a natural fisherman. My father-in-law is a great fisherman, and that's fun. My grandpa was a great fisherman, and that's a beautiful tie-in. I can understand the passion, but I don't have a lot of practice. But we get to learn together, and that's really, in doing hard stuff, I'm talking about do stuff that you might be uncomfortable with. It's not unsafe. I'm not telling you to put yourself in harm's way, but I'm saying find something that you're interested in that lines up with what you have as opportunities in your area and give it a shot. Maybe it'll go poorly. You have an experience together. You can show Jesus in that. You don't have to go 10 out of 10, Instagram ready, like phenomenal life experiences throughout the way, because that's not real life, and that's not life with Jesus. I'm pretty sure 11 out of the 12 apostles weren't taking Instagram pictures of their perfect lives, of their time in prison, of their, being mocked and ridiculed for the gospel. Instead, they were intentionally spending their time for the abundance that Christ was promising them. They at no point regretted their life choice and go, you know what? I could have done something better with my days. They went, you know what? I'm living life to the fullest. It's hard. It's tricky. And I know I'm going to die for it at some point. But this is the life that is full. This is life to the fullest, living it with Christ and for him. So that's my encouragement to you. A couple examples I did for the hard stuff. I'm not a natural camper, but we put on the calendar a time to take all 3 kids and the fathers-in-law out to a lovely national park here in the Northwest. If you ever come into the area, Ohanapakash, please go there. It's gorgeous. Old growth trees, paved roads, kids can ride their bikes in circles. So it's not exactly camping, but you stay in a tent. Like, it counts. There's flushing toilets nearby. Like, it's not that hard. But time in the woods, some opportunity to practice some of that risk and responsibility we've talked about. My sons went out for like little 15-minute ventures. We backed up right against the woods, and then 25-minute ventures. And then by the end, they were gone for 45 minutes at a time. And in talking it out with the papas, we're like, absolutely, like, the boys could get hurt out there. This is the real woods, right? Like, if you get too far gone, like, you're in the middle of a valley that runs for like 40 miles, like, not coming back anytime super soon. We're going to have to go and find you. And we gave them some survival techniques and some opportunities to know where they are based on landmark. Like, we trained them on that. They've shown themselves faithful in previous ventures like this. And we decided in the shorter, growing longer as they came back to home base, that this was a deliberate risk we were taking. Now, that's a hard thing to do. It's hard for us to let them out of sight. Camping is difficult because it's uncomfortable. And it's hard for the kids because they work their little hands and feet super hard. They came back with scratches and sweat and dirt and smiles. So does that mean you have to go camping? No. But that's an example of something that's a push for me. For you, it might be overnight camping. For you, it might be starting a garden. For you, it might be helping a neighbor, or, I don't know, doing some other kind of project. But the point is twofold. You're doing the hard thing. There's experience to be had in that. There is a deliberateness that comes from doing hard stuff. And it's one of the great things that tech gets around. Tech promises this will be easier. This will be faster. This will make you more successful. You don't have to put out any effort and you get all the reward. That's not biblical in terms of how we grow our character. There is no such thing. Instead, there is dying to yourself and being born new, and then the journey of walking with Jesus that bears good fruit. And it is work, but it's beautiful, fruitful work. The kind of fruit that was in the, or the kind of work that was in the Garden of Eden, man. There was work in the garden, but it wasn't the kind that kills you. It was the kind that brings life and hope and fruit. And the second side of that is, once you reach a certain level of difficulty, when you run into something else hard in life, you at least know the feeling. And I saw this come up 13 years ago, when I quit playing video games. I realized very quickly I didn't have a lot of good coping mechanisms. Cycling very quickly became one of my processes of like, I'm going to do something hard just so I know what it feels like. That has been really neat to see like, okay, something breaks in my house. I don't know what it looks like to fix this. And I don't actually know the words yet, but I know how to figure it out because I've experienced some other hard stuff and I've fixed some stuff in my house and I kind of know where my limit is. Like I can work up until plumbing. And then I'm like, nope, that's a leak. I need to get some help on this. And then I have friends I can call. That has taken years for me because I started from ground zero. I knew nothing about home ownership or working on stuff or how to fix things. But it's been a 13-year journey of going, you know what? Instead of playing a video game, I'm going to, this weekend, pull a tree out of the ground. Now, a buddy of mine tried to use his Toyota Tundra and a tow rope to rip this thing out of the ground after I cut some of the main roots around the side. Turns out trees don't like coming out of the ground. It did not work. But 4 hours later, with a lot of blisters and sweat and grime all over me, I had sweet victory over a giant root ball of a tree. So that kind of stuff is, yes, satisfying, but the lessons we're learning of being present, my kids got to help me. It was an opportunity to have abundance. Why? Because I'm present in the moment. Can't be anywhere but in the moment when you're fighting a root ball. You can do this together. It can be a real world experience where it is embodied and it is synchronous and it is one-to-one, one-to-several. And I skipped the high barrier to entry, but we are in these relationships that have a cost. They cost to keep and they cost if we lose them. That's very important to a real world experience. And doing the hard things builds our personal character. It builds the reality of why Jesus came for us. We understand the difficulty of a good life and what Jesus gives us for free when he says, I will take your sin upon myself and I will give you eternal life and fill you with my spirit so that you can do the will of God now, so that you can see God's kingdom arrive in your heart, in your family, in your community, and in your world. That is what we're called into. And the hard work helps us see some of that. It helps us see that line between working really hard so that I can achieve something and make something of myself, and working real hard because life is hard and that God can be good in that. And I would encourage you to find some way to add some of that hard work to your life. Make it fun, make it a game, but let there be some exertion in that. So I hope that this was encouraging to you. I think in closing, if we were going to, wrap it all up with a nice little bow, I would just say this. Remember that we can remove the news of the constant feed, that constant distraction of bad stuff. We can get our phones out of our rooms and we can make dinner conversation a touch point, or breakfast conversation, but mealtime a touch point for regular conversation. And then we can start a priority list, get real world experiences and try hard stuff, not because harder is better in terms of difficulty of accomplishment. We're not out here to just suffer to build character like Calvin's dad in Calvin and Hobbes, where like, that was hard. You built character. Somehow you must be better. But instead doing the hard things because there's enjoyment and there's presence and there's a process that's good in that also shows our dependence. It drives us out of ourselves. It grows us. And in doing the difficult things, we recognize more of who God is. And I should probably expand on that at another time, but in doing difficult things, we realize our own limits. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I found that for myself with trees recently. So I hope it's encouraging to you. I hope that this conversation helps you think about how do we get the most out of life and what does that even mean? And that you'll take me up on some of those opportunities for how you can look at your life and say, Lord, where do I need more of your abundance? Not just more stuff or more time or more money, but more of you. And that I would just pray into that because he is faithful to answer that prayer. Lord, would you show me where I need you? He loves that because that's like asking for wisdom. He wants some of his discernment, and he gives discernment, wisdom to all without finding fault. So, if this was encouraging, would you share it with someone? Would you check out our books? Ann and I wrote books. I wrote Gospel-Centered Tech, which is my 2 talks basically turned into a single book. So smartphones, video games, pornography, and then how do we make tech safe at home? And I basically then tie that into how do we live now in this tech world, raising kids who love God and use tech. And then Anna's is The Graceful Disconnect, a 25-day devotional journey. And it's really good. She's a great writer, so you'll enjoy it. in terms of the easy to read part, but you also be challenged. She brings the scripture to bear in a very meaningful way that is good for men and women. It's aimed at moms, but I have had dads and moms respond to me and saying like, man, Anna's book, it was so encouraging. I've been so challenged, and the Lord is doing work in my heart thanks to her work. So you can go to Gospel Centered Tech to check that out, or just go to Amazon and look up Gospel Centered Tech or The Graceful Disconnect. Then would you check us out? Send us any notes you have. Not check us out. Would you reach out with any questions you've got on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at Love God Use Tech, or you can reach out to me directly, Nathan@gospeltech.net. And then join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.